Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Committee of the Whole meeting of Osoyoos Town Council on Tuesday, May the 12th, 2026 at 9 a.m. in Council Chambers. So first off, we need to have the approval and no late items. Thank you. We have the approval of the agenda. Thank you very much. Councillor Chong, Councillor Bennett, all in favor? Thank you. And the adoption of some minutes. That's the Committee of the Whole minutes of April the 28th, 2026. Councillor King, Councillor Poderica, all in favor. Thank you. And first off, we have some delegations. And the first one is from Vita, watering restrictions request for exemption. So, Mr. Zanfleet, are you coming up to the front or is somebody going to speak? Good. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm here from C3 representing Vita for requesting an exemption for the irrigation. We're asking for the same exemption as we had last year. Last year, we had permission to stick to the amount of days of watering that were permitted, but because these zones are so large that the controller has so many zones, we asked that we could run half of the controller on the first night, and then on the second night we'd run the second half. So if it's a 15 zone controller, we'd run 8 zones on the one night, and the next night we'd follow up at the second 7. And then if we're allowed 2 days a week, then we do the same thing again. You're still only, each zone is only running by the allowable days a week that they're run. But because these zones are so big, we can't get them all done in that time frame. We had from 10 till 6 in the morning, and Vita has done multiple projects to reduce their demand. Last year, they spent the money and did the black flower beds, turning them from broadcast spray to drip, reducing the water demand and being more efficient. This year, with the installation of the meter pit in the street, their flow actually decreased, as you're finding out with a lot of places that have got a meter pit. And we had to go through, we went through the broadcast sprays in the lawns in every zone and pulled out the 4-gallon-a-minute nozzles and put in 1.5 or 2-gallon-a-minute nozzles, thus again restricting the flow and conserving the water for, up to 50% of what their demand was. So, but to get enough water to keep the trees and the shrubs and everything alive, we're asking for this exemption as we had last year.
Council, does anybody have any questions about this? You do. I'll start. You do know that we have 2 zones or two watering number 2 watering, so 2 days a week,
Yeah,
not 3.
Exactly. It's down to 2 days a week, which we set the controller to that. So what we would do, because Vita's allowed Monday and Thursday, we'd water half the controller on Monday night, other half on Tuesday night. Then on Thursday night for the second night, we'd water half the controller and then the second half on the Friday.
My only concern is, and this applies to everybody, that we are in a drought situation in the valley right now. I've been at several meetings lately about this. We used to be at 58% of normal for this time. We are now down to 31%. Peachland has already moved to 1 day a week, and that would not surprise me that the rest of the Okanagan would end up that way too. There are wells and all kinds of places where they measure the water. All of them at this point are down already. So I just want you to be prepared for that, because that definitely is something that we may have to look at. We don't have to yet, but the Board of Control for the lake, Osoyoos, has this weekend put in a drought declaration, which allows a little bit of flexibility with the water level in order to try and protect it for everybody, for infrastructure that goes into the lake, for farmers and orchardists, because all of these areas are going to have to, I think, see a reduction in water. I don't see any other way to it. However, at this point, we're at 2 days a week.
Mhm.
So you said, put in some different, because you were upgrading some of the systems that you had from last year.
Yeah,
Am I
because
correct?
the flows were actually decreased a bit because of the water meter. We didn't have the flow ability to go through that zone in the, like per
Yes,
minute,
yeah.
how many gallons per minute. So we reduced the size of the nozzles so reduced the demand from each sprinkler by 50%.
Yeah.
So when you got 20 sprinklers on a zone, that's
Yeah.
fair bit.
Yeah, when we've put drips on all the plants now instead of broadcast spray.
Good,
And we
good.
spent $250,000 last year, and we're proposing another 225,000 for the rest of the project to do the same thing on the front house of the building for this year. So that's going up in front of our AGM this weekend. So
Good.
we are doing as much as we possibly can to reduce what we consume. I've actually had conversations with Amy regarding wells to try to see where I can find out the information to drill wells just for the irrigation, so that we don't use treated water if it was all possible. We didn't want to use treated water. We were hoping that we could just drill them and use untreated water, so we weren't putting even less demand on the system. So, but right now we just don't have that information, so we can't apply.
No, and I think you'd need to be very careful, anybody in drilling wells, because there's quite a procedure that has to go through
Oh,
before
yeah, we're
anything like that.
fully
Yeah.
aware that there's
Yeah.
a procedure and fully aware to conform if possible, but we just thought it was the right thing to do to not be using treated water if at all possible. So
So the water is treated with chemicals?
no, it's city water. So yeah, your water, your city water is coming to us, which is treated.
So yes, but it's not treated, it's not from the treated water from the sewage lagoons like some places.
It might help.
That's being used in quite a few places.
Yeah.
All right, I'm just going to see if anybody else has any. Go ahead, Councillor Chong.
Thank you. Over the past, it has been 3 years you started the project, and it's been multi-phased in the right direction, climate appropriate plantation and water smarting essentially. So, thank you for kind of leading the charge on that. And I do want to clarify, and we clarify this every single year, the exemption doesn't mean you're going to be using more water. It's because there's technical limitations in your dispersion system. So in order to have the appropriate zone perfusion for water, you need more time.
Exactly.
So I do want to clarify that this exemption is really not more water, it's just a better use of it.
Yeah, we're actually using less water than if we were a single family house that opened a tap in their front and a tap in their back, and they put out a sprinkler on the front and the back and ran it for the 4 hours like they're legally allowed to. We're using far less. We only have, was it 32 zones?
Yeah.
32 zones, which is 32 hoses basically going out for 86 townhouses, which do have front and back gardens. So technically we're using already massive amounts of water less than. And then we put in the restrictive, drips and everything else. So we're well below what anybody else would be allowed to use.
I'd like to also mention that next week on the 20th, which is a Wednesday, Make Water Work presentation from Okanagan Basin Water Board is coming to Osoyoos. It's open to everybody. Last year, Osoyoos won the award for having the most pledges to make water work. There's all kinds of things on there, checking your irrigation, putting in plants that are suitable to the climate. So this is for everybody, because anybody who wants to attend, it's outside here in the park from 10:30 until 12 on the 20th. We will have that put on e-news. And we do have a lady coming who is from the Okanagan Xeriscape Association, Sigri Kendrick, who came and did some presentations for us earlier this year. And she's coming with plants. And so I think that's really one of the big things that we all need to be looking at. How can we better use water? What kinds of plants are better that do not require as much water? So I invite you to come to that as well. And anybody in town, I really think that we need to learn as much as possible about how to use the water and how to use it wisely and conserve water, because we're going to be with less water. So, are we making, go ahead, Councillor King. and
Thank
then
you,
did
Member.
you?
Yeah, it's great to
Okay.
hear that you're using less water and you changed some taps and things. That's the first I heard in the town that someone's working positively. I guess the question is, we don't make decisions this morning, but this afternoon, if we made the change and helped you, what happens if we change to 1 day a week?
Then,
Then I go in and change the controllers down to 1 day a week. C3 will not set a controller that goes against the bylaw. So we stay on top of all that.
Councillor Bennett?
I just want to say thank you for doing what you guys are doing. That's great.
thanks.
Okay, so thank you very much for your presentation, and we appreciate you coming and filling us in on
Okay.
everything.
Yeah, thank you guys
Okay.
very much.
Thank you for hearing us this morning.
Okay. And next, we have a request from Casa de Lago for water restrictions. Is that Mr. Karen? Okay, thank you. Welcome.
Is that okay? Okay, so we also are represented by C3 as far as our contractors, so we get the same supervision. You know, we're not out there changing controllers, it's them. I just want to clarify that. I'm not sure why they represent Vita at the meeting and not us, but
Just a minute, they asked to come as well as you, so that's why. Yeah.
no, but I just don't know why C3 don't volunteer to do my presentation instead of theirs. That's my question to them.
Maybe you could have asked them.
Yeah, so thank you for letting us make our presentation. We're seeking relief from water restrictions as they put us at an unfair advantage compared to single unit residential properties. And we are seeking some level of equity. With our property density of 185 water accounts on 2.8 hectares, we are already a significant contribution to low water use in Osoyoos. We have about 1/3 of the landscape area as a residential lot would have. So they were saying something the same. That's exactly our line of thinking. Unfortunately, like them, we face significant challenges due to a supply problem. And we have 3 water connections, and 2 of those water connections each have 24 zones on them. So in a 4-hour time zone or 4-hour time water cycle, we're only allowed 10 minutes on one of our sprinklers. And anybody who's watered in their yard knows that 10 minutes is not very sufficient amount of water. And it's very hard for us to change that because we have a very big property and our, piping is quite complex, runs the full lengths, and to go in and make changes so we had 185 zones would be very complicated, or even 4 or 5 more. It's impractical for us to do it with piping, and we need more time out of you guys. We also are doing work in xeriscaping when we can, changing irrigation. But again, we have a system that was designed in early 2000s, and it's just not, designed for the sort of thing we need now. So considering that we have significantly smaller landscape footprint per water account compared to a single unit residential lot, we believe that it's only fair that we're provided with either more hours or more days of water during water restrictions. A typical single unit residential lot would have no difficulty running their zones for 30 minutes. And, as I said, 48 of our zones can only run for 10 minutes. And that's quite a difference. So, we had water restrictions last year and we still lost a lot of plantings, trouble with our lawns. I think we need at least what we had last year, but I would hope that we could get enough that we could run 30 minutes on our zones, either 1 day or 2 days, depending on where you're at. Any questions?
Yeah, thank you. Have you done any improvements with using C3 to the nozzles or to the system that you have? Or you said it's from the early 2000s,
Yeah,
25 years old.
Well, we're just slightly older than Solar Vita, but we have more zones and, a bigger property, I guess. But we have mixes of, we have drip where we can, but unfortunately they're usually mixed in with other things on the same zone. And, so you can't run those drips. They've been able to separate theirs somehow, but for us, that would be very difficult.
So could you explain what, I do believe you came last year
Yes, I
to
did.
and
I did.
applied. What was the allowable restriction last year when you did this?
I believe we were given 8 hours in the 4-hour time, or was it 6? You'd have to look, but
Do we have any idea, Mrs. Robinson?
So for what we approved last year, the exemption for Solvita and Casa del Lago were the same. Where they were watering 3 days a week, the strata was able to have their sprinkler heads go on twice, like 3 times a week. If we were at the restrictions of 2 days a week, the sprinkler heads were allowed to be on twice a week. So however, C3 was able to schedule that for them so that they were within our watering restrictions, their sprinkler heads were only allowed to be on at that time.
So it's similar to what C3 has done
Yeah.
at Solvita. Could I'm not sure whether anybody knows this in our water restrictions, and I've had a couple of questions about it, which is why I bring it up. If you have hand watering, if you have a place in your garden that's fairly small, or you have pots, you can certainly use a hose and hand water, and that's allowed a lot more often than the automatic sprinklers.
yes, and
So
we publish that to our owners, and
Yes.
it would be up to them around their units, and some of them do it and some of them don't. We're not always fully occupied either.
Yes.
And we have some quite big lawn areas that are actually suffering the most. I came from Vancouver, and down there you can not water all summer and they come back nicely in the fall. And that doesn't happen here. The water reserves just aren't there to support it. We actually lose the lawn.
Well, we definitely have a different climate than Vancouver, but they're already at 1 day a week down in Vancouver.
Well,
so
and
it's,
actually
yeah.
no lawns allowed at all.
Yeah.
But you can't do that here.
So we totally understand because we all live here too. So we all have properties. I wasn't sure if anybody had any questions. Go ahead, Councillor Poderica. Oh, sorry, Councillor Ball.
What exactly has your strata done to exacerbate the situation since last year?
Well, we have some smaller areas of grass in front of some of the townhouses that we're taking out, and we're putting in rock and plants that will, be drought resistant. Whenever we change planting, we always take that into consideration. So we have a number of xeriscaping going on this year as well. It'll happen in the
Okay,
spring.
thank you.
Thank you, Richard. I think Water Councillor Appleby kind of took my question or asked my question for me, which was perfect. So again, just I think the reality is I think we all love to have nice big green yards and lawns. The reality and what we're seeing right now and the changes around us is those green lawns that we've had for years aren't going to be something that we can continue, especially with our current water supply challenges. So it's great to see there's some improvements there. Obviously encourage those improvements for anyone that's looking at their landscaping as to how best to reduce water usage in the community, and so appreciate the changes that we made and certainly encourage those to continue.
Thank you, Councillor King.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I see in your presentation, you talk about a timer for 10 minutes. Why can't you put a different timer in and reset that, say, to 20 minutes?
Because you got 24 zones and you got 240 minutes. That gives you 10 minutes per zone. And I think, you're missing a point here. I know we're not supposed to debate this stuff, but, we're looking for equity with single unit residential lots who can easily water for 30 minutes. And just because we live in a high density strata, we're being put at a very disadvantage in this thing. We're doing much more than these single family lots have to do to meet your water restrictions. We're already, because of our smaller size of landscaping area per unit, I mean, we're way ahead of those people, and you're treating us poorly. That's my point.
I'm sorry, I'm not gonna agree to
You know,
that, but
I know.
we all need to do our best at conserving water. And I think you heard me say to the last group that
Yeah.
next week we do have Make Water Work presentation, and we'd certainly invite any of the people from Casa del Lago to come and learn more about it and ask questions. I think it would be worthwhile for anybody in the
Yeah.
town.
Yeah, I'll
Um,
pass it on to the Strata Council.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Chong.
Thank you. Are there any plans to upgrade the system or make changes that can mitigate this in the future?
As I say, it's very complex because, you know the size of our property. It's, we have pipes running everywhere, and we could add like 4 more connections and get 30 minutes. But I mean, that would be a huge piping issue. Something you can solve just by making the decision
This
to
is
give us
true.
more time.
I would also, as a high density residential area, you also have the advantage of having more, well, you have strata, right? And you have contingency, and that would be under the under the rights of that strata to budget accordingly to have these upgrades to kind of mitigate these problems in the future as well, right?
Yeah, again, but why are we expected to do more than a single family lot? That's the whole point. You just don't forget, we have 185 water accounts on our property, and we're being treated like a single family lot.
So thank you very much
Okay.
for coming and
Yeah.
presenting this to us. And my assumption is that it would be what we did for Sol Vita and for you last year would be something that we
Okay.
would
Thank you very
continue
much.
for this year.
Thank you.
But please, everybody needs to think about conserving water and using less, no
Yeah.
matter what.
Yes.
Certainly on my lot, I do less watering with what I have. So I'm using less water than maybe the person next door to me because I'm being careful about it. And I think we all need to do that.
And water meters are going to help.
Oh,
Okay,
well,
thank
we'll
you.
be paying for what we use, so that's helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could we turn off the microphone there, please? Thanks. Okay. So we will move on to staff reports and the agricultural land reserve block exclusion proposal, ALR tax exemption information. And I see that we have Ms. Duong online. So Ms. Duong, would you like to go ahead with your report, please?
Absolutely. I've just got a presentation to share. And let me know if you're seeing the presentation on your end.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Perfect. So just to start us off, as Council recalls, on April 28th, 2026, a public hearing was held with respect to a proposal to exclude 178.11 hectares of land from the Agricultural Land Reserve. Following that public hearing, Council subsequently had resolved that the matter of the application to the ALC for that exclusion be referred back to Committee of the Whole. So it's staff's understanding that Council's intention with the referral of the project back to committee largely relates to concerns about anticipated tax implications where the proposed exclusion application is submitted to the ALC and is successful, specifically for those owners who've been identified as currently receiving the ALR school tax exemption. So as has been previously discussed, properties within the ALR have the potential to benefit from legislated exemptions from certain types of property taxes that are prescribed under relevant taxing legislation. Given that the tax exemption hinges partly on ALR status of these identified properties, it'd be anticipated then that the exclusion of the properties would make them ineligible for the tax exemptions that they currently benefit from. And it's noted that one of the concerns that was raised related to was related to the extent of these potential tax implications where a property is no longer eligible for that exemption. So the point of this presentation is really just to provide more background information on tax exemptions that apply within the ALR to certain properties, and also just give a bit of an overview of the estimated tax implications for those properties if they were to lose that eligibility. So as previously mentioned, the tax exemption in question is a product of the School Act, specifically Section 130 sub 1 sub B of the School Act exempts 50% of the assessed value of a parcel of land from taxation under that act, where a property is located within the ALR, is subject to restrictions under the ALC Act, and is either vacant or unused, or is used for farm or residential purposes. Now, while other exemptions apply for those properties with farm classification, this exemption is not seen to apply to the identified properties, considering that none of them actually have farm status. The exemption applies solely to assessed land value of the property, so it doesn't impact assessed improvement value, the things that are built on the land. It's also important to note that the school tax exemption is actually extended to other taxes and levies. It's kind of chained through references within other taxing statutes. So as it relates to the town of Vesuvius, the exemptions that it's extended to include hospital taxes as well as BC assessment and municipal finance authority levies, in addition to school taxes. So in other jurisdictions, the exemption is actually understood to apply to policing taxes and regional transit taxes as well, but that doesn't apply in the town. And importantly, the exemption does not apply to municipal taxes. Now, the province has implemented a number of tax policies over the years in relation to supporting the agricultural industry, with the ALR school tax exemption just being one of them. And it's generally understood that it's intended to reduce financial burdens on farmers in the province. So our understanding is that the intention of the ALR school tax exemption is to encourage farming of lands within the ALR and also incentivize retaining those vacant and unused lands that could eventually be farmed into the future. So again, with this in mind, the exemption is intended to benefit primarily farmers. And then just getting into a bit of the findings of our assessment, as part of the research that we undertook for the ALR block exclusion proposal project, we had reviewed available tax roll data to determine whether any of the subject properties actually currently receive the school tax exemption and do not have farm classification and would therefore be ineligible for the exemption if the property was excluded from the ALR. So in total, we identified 8 properties which currently receive the exemption and do not have farm classification. These properties include 2801 Lakeshore Drive, 2615 Lakeshore Drive, 5227, 5229, and 5231 Lakeshore Drive, 4906 Cedar Lane, 8214 Meadowlark Drive, and 7414 97th Street. Although one additional property was identified as receiving the exemption, it's noted that that property owner had actually requested that that portion of their property be part of the exclusion proposal, and also that property has farm classification, would potentially be benefiting then from the farm classification exemption under the School Act. So with this in mind, our assessment really is just focused on those 8 parcels that we mentioned. So as part of preparing this item for council, we assessed the current uses of the 8 properties in question, as well as their BC assessment property classification. So of those 8 properties, we do note that 4 of the properties, including a cluster of residential lots along the western portion of Lakeshore Drive and the property at Cedar Lane, are predominantly used for residential purposes and are classified as residential by BC assessment. The other 4 properties are predominantly used for commercial or mixed use purposes. Specifically, 2 of the properties along Lakeshore Drive are understood to be used as campgrounds and are classified as residential by BC assessment. 1 property along Meadowlark Drive is predominantly used as an auto yard, but does contain a residential dwelling unit. And 1 property on 97th Street is understood to contain a motel as well as a manufactured home park. So both of these properties are actually classified as both residential and business and other classification, but the exemption only applies to the residential class. So with all this in mind, it's important to note that properties vary widely in assessed land value, as there's a number of factors involved in assessing land by BC assessment. So that wide variation also proportionally reflects a wide variation in the anticipated tax implications if the properties were to lose eligibility for that school tax exemption. Now, using 2025 tax roll data and comparing the total tax amounts with and without the exemption, we note that if the properties that we identified are excluded from the ALR, the estimated amount of change or increase in total taxes paid could range from approximately $85 up to over $26,000. So again, it's emphasized that these are estimates, and again, they correlate directly to the assessed land value of the property, meaning that properties with higher assessed values of residential class lands would proportionally have higher tax amounts associated with them. And onto the considerations, as we've mentioned in the past, staff do find that the ALR school tax exemption is largely intended to be directed to farmers, and that's meant to be a financial incentive for farming ALR lands and retaining those lands for future farm use. So in the case of the 8 identified properties, much like the other properties that have been proposed for exclusion, they are being used for purposes other than agriculture. And in this regard, the ALR school tax exemption does not appear to be serving its intended purpose of supporting farmers and are instead benefiting owners of properties that are not being farmed and have been developed for non-farm purposes. So the town of Osoyoos isn't unique in this. Similar concerns have been raised by other local governments, including the Metro Vancouver Regional District and the City of Pitt Meadows. Specifically, Metro Vancouver Regional District had actually released a white paper back in 2016 that examined farm tax policies in the province. And this included the school tax exemption. And they had noted that per their 2015 data, residential land use had received a majority of the school tax exemption benefits, and that properties not used for farming had actually accounted for 84% of the total amount of that school tax exemption. And that white paper had ultimately recommended elimination of the exemption for residential properties. Now, similarly, in the City of Pitt Meadows, they had submitted a resolution to UBCM back in 2024 that had called on the province to remove the exemption for vacant and unused land, as well as residential land of the ALR, as the exemption should only apply to ALR lands being used for farm purposes. Additionally, we do recognize that the exclusion of these properties can potentially result in large increases in future tax payments, which can, of course, be detrimental to those property owners in question. However, it's important to emphasize that the relevant taxes are understood to generally pay for supportive services, which most British Columbia property owners are expected to pay into in full. So in this regard, the uneven application of tax exemptions can be seen as being inequitable. Lastly, we do recognize that it was mentioned at the last meeting that there may be a desire to hold another public meeting on the matter. And we did want to just take the opportunity to highlight that the notification of this proposal has been fairly substantial and has exceeded legislative requirements for notification. So just as a reminder, as part of the project, the town had sent out to all owners of land within the entirety of the block exclusion proposal a letter of January 27, 2026, as a preliminary notification advising of the upcoming public hearing. And then subsequently on April 13th, all of those owners would have been sent another letter as a formal notice of public hearing. In addition to those 2 letters, the owners of the 8 identified properties would have received targeted letters advising of potential implications from a tax perspective, and that letter also reminded the owners of the upcoming hearing. Additionally, notice was provided via newspaper ads in 2 circulations leading up to the public hearing. There was also signage posted around town, an e-news notification had gone out, and there was information on the project webpage. These notifications would have provided the date of the hearing and how to submit feedback or direct questions to the town. And in general, written submissions received have been fairly limited for this project, and a compilation of those submissions would have been received by council prior to the closure of the public hearing on the 28th. So for the reasons mentioned during this presentation, we are recommending that the proposal proceed as is, and given that additional information has been considered by council following the closure of that April 28th public hearing, we are recommending also that a second public hearing be scheduled for June 9th. If council is supportive of staff's recommendation, additional notifications would then be circulated to all affected property owners via letter, posting of notice in a public posting place, and 2 more circulations of newspaper ads. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wong. It's, you have presented this very well, and I certainly read through it with interest. So I'm just going to see if anybody has any questions, first of all, or any comments. Go ahead.
Sorry. Thank you, Your Worship. And again, thanks, Mr. Wong, for going over that. I think part of the concern that came out from the last public hearing more so is, there is inequity. There's 8 properties. One of those properties contains 105 owners who have benefited from something that their neighbors, don't, and the rest of the community don't, and the rest of the community, fortunately pays their share of the services. And going back in the history of when these properties were either subdivided or logistics in which took place that this exemption remained. I see this as a way an opportunity here to fix that moving forward. It is, to use that as the reason for why he shouldn't be exempted. As we've seen in those properties that were proposed, there is no agricultural activity in recent history that has occurred, and there is no current agricultural history activity that's occurring on those properties right now. And I'd support moving forward with this as proposed.
Thank you. Councillor Chong?
Kind of echoing the same statements I said last time. It's frustrating because as someone who does pay all those taxes, this exemption, it needs to end. This is not fair to the rest of the residents of Osoyoos. And looking through historic satellite imagery, I mean, none of these properties were growing anything since at least December 31st, 2004. So if the intent of the tax exemption is to support farming, then in this case, that has failed. And then by doing some calculations like that's a lot of taxation dollars that could have gone towards the hospital, could have gone towards schooling. And I mean, there's no way for us to recoup this. And I mean, it just frustrates me. But I think the best time to correct this is now. And that way we can move forward and with equitable treatment for everyone.
Thank you. Councillor King?
I'll move option 1.
All 3 parts of it? Yes. It's seconded over here. Anybody else need to speak to it? I just had a question first before we vote. If this went through and it was agreed, we would then wait for the ALC to come back with their ruling before we adjusted taxes. Is that correct, Ms. Duong?
I may need some assistance from Ms. Keith on this one. My understanding is that the exemptions, so if the properties were excluded and they lost eligibility for the tax exemptions, my understanding is that the amounts are actually communicated essentially to the town, and the town collects right on behalf of those various public organizations. So it would actually be an automatic, in theory, shift in the taxation amount, and that exemption would be gone after they're out of the ALR.
Thank you. I'll ask Ms. Keith to explain that. Could you do it, please?
Yes, to support Ms. Duong, that's exactly how it would go. Once it's approved, BC Assessment would be notified and it would be reflected on their assessed values. We then receive their assessed values every taxation year, and that's how our taxation are calculated. We ourselves in this community, we won't be making any adjustments. We will just be applying tax rates as per normal to the assessed values. It's the assessed values that will change, and that will come directly from BC Assessment.
Thank you very much. So it's been moved and seconded that we go with option 1. I will call the question. All in favor? Thank you very much. So we will have on June the 9th, the next public hearing. Thank you. Next is the proposed zoning review of 4601 97th Street. Ms. Duong.
Thank you, and I've got a quick presentation for this one as well. And just double checking that's coming up on your side.
We don't see it yet.
Let's see. And how about now?
No. We just see you now.
Okay, one more time.
Not working.
That's okay. I can run through it verbally.
Okay,
It's
please
there's
do.
no,
That would make more sense. Go ahead.
sounds good. All right. So the property in question is located at 4601 97th Street. Just a bit of OCP zoning background. The property is designated for medium density residential use under the OCP bylaw. And similarly, it is zoned for medium density residential use as well, with a site specific provision allowing for secondary suites. The parcel is 1.41 hectares in size and is currently being developed to 2 4-unit townhouse buildings, with an additional 4-unit townhouse building also being under construction. So just a bit of background on some of the permitting history from the town. So multifamily residential development permit number 21-12 was issued for a multifamily residential development at the property back in 2022. Building permits were also issued for the construction of 3 4-unit townhouse buildings, civil works, and 2 retaining walls in 2024. And a new multifamily residential development permit application was received by the town just earlier this year in January to revise the site layout and landscaping plan in order to reflect changes that were required to be made by the developer to the internal access roadway. Adding on to that, in February this year, the developer had submitted for approval from the approving officer a phase strata plan declaration, or a Form P, in order to allow for the development to be completed over 4 phases, which the approving officer did approve. And then most recently in March, 2 building permit applications were received by the town, each of which proposing to construct a 4-unit townhouse building. So at its meeting of November 12th, 2024, council had previously considered a rezoning of this property in order to allow for secondary suite as a site-specific allowance, as previously mentioned. And now this is coming back to us as we've identified an issue. So during the preliminary review stages of the more recently received development permit application earlier this year, we did note that the development plans had included a duplex dwelling, and duplex dwellings are not permitted within the RM1 zone, so that would require a rezoning to proceed. We took a further look at development plans that have been submitted over the course of the development planning process, as this has actually started and was the developer had worked with the town for several years leading up to this point. So we did note that duplex dwelling was actually shown in development plans that the town has received since 2021, although duplex dwelling was also not permitted within the former high density residential, or R7 zone, that applied to the property. And then kind of compounding onto this, we did note that a servicing agreement was entered into in 2024 as part of the building permit process, and had actually required the construction of on and off-site works as per approved civil drawings that the town would have reviewed, which included individual service connections based on the location of where those dwelling units were intended to be. So it's understood at this point that the works have actually been completed, and in this regard, all the works and services have actually been completed in order to facilitate the construction of the duplex moving forward. And just from a land use planning perspective, we do recognize that the OCP bylaw indicates that the medium density residential designation of lands is intended for multifamily developments, which generally consists of 3 or more dwelling units, and that includes apartment buildings and townhouses. So to support this, the zoning bylaw actually requires that apartment buildings and townhouses, by definition, include a minimum of 3 dwelling units, amongst other things. So this form of development typically provides for greater densities and more efficient land uses, particularly when you're considering that the land available for larger developments is limited within the town. Now, duplex dwellings are considered to be a form of low density residential development, and subsequently is not a preferred use within the medium density residential land designation. But that being said, we also recognize that the proposed duplex is part of a much larger 50-unit multifamily residential development plan. and the development will largely be consisting of townhouses, and the duplex dwelling would actually be considered just the single outlier when you're viewing the development as a whole. On the other hand, staff do acknowledge that the developer has other options available to them, given that this phase of development hasn't actually been built out yet. So the developer could actually potentially add one more unit onto the proposed duplex, which would then align the building with a townhouse definition. The developer could also relocate and combine the proposed duplex with a nearby townhouse in order to create essentially a larger duplex or a larger townhouse building, or they could remove the proposed duplex building from future development plans. That being said, from staff level, we do recognize that each of these options would have its own additional costs in the form of additional building construction, additional services, and or legal fees that are associated with land title requirements. And on top of that, option 3, of course, would result in the loss of future housing units. So with this in mind, we are supportive of the initiation of the rezoning to allow for the single duplex dwelling to be permitted at the property. And if council's supportive, given that we have the various land use bylaw amendments project that remains ongoing, and that project does propose amendments to the zoning bylaw under zoning amendment bylaw number 1395.12, we do think there's an efficiency that could be had in including the amendment as part of that amendment bylaw. So with that in mind, our staff recommendation is that amendment bylaw number 1395.12 be revised in order to include a regulation permitting one duplex dwelling as a principal use at 4601 97th Street. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Duong. We've got the report in front of us, so we could see the pictures that you're referring to. Council, go ahead, Councillor Chong.
I'm just going to move option 1. This seems like, the developer has done everything right, and then, on further review, this small aspect of the plans was missed, and I don't think it's fair or right to punish the developer. So with that said, I move option 1.
Thank you. Are you seconding? No, questions first. Is there a seconder first? You can second it and then go ahead. Oh.
I just, with this new development, was the owner going to move into one of those duplexes? The way it reads.
Do you know, Ms. Duong?
No, I don't know.
No, and it hasn't been built yet, so.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Worship, through you, Ms. Strong. When we made an amendment, I believe, to this development about a year and a half ago to allow secondary units, would that be allowed still in the duplex itself, or would they just be a single unit each in both halves of the duplex?
Ms. Duong, do you know the answer to that one?
Yes, so the way that the provision reads in the zoning bylaw, secondary suite could be within any of the dwelling units on the property. Of course, it has to abide by BC Building Code, which sets out certain standards for the types and locations of where those secondary suites could be. But yes, secondary suites could be permitted within those duplex dwelling units.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. Another question? Go ahead.
Just for confirmation, if I recall correctly, the floor plans of the townhouses and duplexes were all pretty much the same, if not just mirrored, and then the accessory dwelling was on the ground floor or the bottom floor, and it was just designed so that there's the potential for the accessory dwelling. So in this case, with the duplex, it's not so much one unit will be a primary and the second in the duplex will be the accessory. Each will be their own dwelling and each will have the potential for their own accessory. Just to clarify the wording.
That's what I thought you meant when you said that. Is that correct, Ms. Duong?
Yes, so you'd have one duplex dwelling, the second one, and each of them could have a secondary suite within them.
Go ahead, Jim.
If we could pass this and allow a secondary suite, how does that impact the parking? Is there enough parking?
So parking requirements would need to be proved out at the time of building permit issuance. So at this current moment, I don't have specific plans that I would have assessed.
Okay, but that would be looked at obviously for the other buildings that already have the ability to have a secondary suite in the basement. The parking would have been looked at the same time. Am I correct?
Yes, that's
So in other
correct.
words, two garages underneath rather than just one, right?
They would be able to provide it with it would have to be within the site, of course.
Okay.
It's not necessary that it has to be within a garage per se. But yes, as part of a building permit issuance, zoning review would be undertaken to ensure that the proposed development is compliant with all zoning requirements, including parking.
Thank you very much. Did you have something else?
If I recall correctly, when this first came to council, we checked that box off. We made sure that there was enough and sufficient parking in the case that the accessory dwelling was to be used as well. If I recall correctly, I think Councillor King asked that question at that time as well. So that's been checked.
And it was zoning bylaw 1395.02 in 2024 that went through. Yeah. Okay, so we have the motion. Have we voted on this yet? No. Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we go with the option 1. All in favor? Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Duong. Appreciate it. All your help today. And thank you, a seconder. Thank you. Moved and seconded that they terminate.
Oh, wait, that's not.
Oh, we have something else. I'm sorry. I was looking at it too. We did. I know it's just election proposed changes. Sorry, presentation by director, but we just didn't have a paper in here. So, but
yeah.
Thank you. Are you presenting this, Mrs. Coulson? Okay, thank you.
Just gonna hang on, just wait for the PowerPoint to come up. Here we are. So I would like to introduce several proposed amendments to our election bylaw in preparation for the October general local elections. And the 3 elements of it include introduction of mail ballots, the guidelines for placement of election signs, and an amendment to one of the advanced voting dates. I'll explain a little bit more about why we wish to implement the use of mail ballots first. In short, they allow some flexibility in the voting process for electors. By allowing registration and completion of the ballot at the elector's convenience, voting is made possible for some people who otherwise might miss the voting opportunity. Examples could be someone who's out of town for all the other voting opportunities in person. They're in a care facility and perhaps they're not feeling well enough to come downstairs at the time the mobile poll visits. Somebody who can't make it to a voting place because of lack of transportation, childcare, health issues, mobility issues, or someone who's working during all of the other voting opportunities. So mail ballots are sometimes misunderstood. There's concern about the thought of them being in every mail box like a flyer. That's certainly not the case. The process is actually very similar to voting at the poll. Electors have to register, ID has to be validated, and ballots are submitted for counting. The timing is just a little bit different. For those wishing to vote by mail, they have to show ID and register with their application in order to receive a mail ballot. If the process is done remotely, they have to provide photocopies of their ID. Election staff validate the registration and entitlement to vote and then put the elector on a list to receive a mail ballot when the ballots are ready post-nomination period. And when the elector receives the ballot, they vote and put the ballot in a sealed secrecy sleeve. And detailed recordings are kept of everybody who has applied for a mail ballot and receives a mail ballot. Mail ballots are kept secure until they're fed through the voting machine at 8 p.m. on general voting day. I'll talk now about
Mrs. Coulson, can I just ask, in order to receive a mail-in ballot, there is a time limit on that? In other words, you cannot come in the day of the election and say, I'd like to receive, I mean, that doesn't make sense at all, but how far in advance do you have to request one?
It would have to be within a number of hours before general voting day, so that there's sufficient time for us to do our validation check, issue the ballot, and then receive the ballot back. But it can be a fairly short period of time. That'll be specified in the bylaw.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
what happens if the mail goes on strike? What happens to all those ballots?
I guess we would be watching for a mail strike, but my experience has been that most people actually bring it back and drop it off, because most of the people taking advantage of it are actually in town.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, we'll talk about election signs. It's going to be proposed that signs may be placed on street boulevards as long as vehicular and pedestrian access and sightlines are not impaired. They may also be placed on private property with the owner's permission. Where signs will not be allowed, however, is in parks, on other town or public property. For example, sidewalks, poles, fences, planters. I've actually seen quite a bit of damage done to public property by putting signs into planters and damaging plants, or putting them into landscaped areas and puncturing the landscaping fabric. There will be a limit on the size of the sign to 1.5 square meters, and there will be a limit of 2 candidate signs per parcel frontage. The amendments are intended to make the placement of signs safe and to provide clarity for the candidates and the town's expectations around the placement of signs. So with respect to the advance voting day, we are going to be proposing that one of the 2 advance voting days be moved. There are 2 advance voting days required now, one that's legislated 10 days prior to general voting day, and the other one is selected by the local government. It is currently specified in the bylaw that it's 3 days before the election, and we're going to propose that it be moved to a week before the general election. The intent is to provide one more earlier opportunity, not just 3 days in advance, and also to align with what's in the regional districts bylaw should we decide to co-locate polls with the election for directors. So I'm hoping to bring the bylaw to the next council meeting for readings, and would be pleased to answer any of council's questions.
Thank you very much. And I think that it seems to be sensible and fair to always have a look every 4 years at the bylaws and see if they fit with what we want at the time. Does anybody have any other questions of Mrs. Coulson? So this is just a notification that you're going to bring this forward. Great. Thank you very much. No questions? Now,
Terminate.
we already have it. We can't use the first 2? No. All right. Jim, who's seconding it? Johnny, all in favor?